Welcome to First Dates and Soulmates, where being queer was not actually invented by Will and Grace. I am your co-host, Meg Casebolt.
And I'm Nikki McKnight.
And we are so excited to have a queer historical author here. And I don't know whether to introduce you by your real name or your pen name. So I'm going to let you introduce yourself, Joanna.
Hello, I'm going to introduce myself as a queer historical romance writer and a Gemini, an eater of many grapes, and by my pen name, Joanna Lowell.
Right. Joanna, I would love to hear, specifically how you got started with writing queer romance, because that wasn't your background. That wasn't the start of your publishing career, but why queer romance and why queer historical romance in particular?
Awesome. Yeah. So I've always been a romance reader, and as Gen Xer, there was no queer romance in the bargain bin when I was growing up. So I read those fat zebra heart historical romance, with the lovegram hologram on them, so I read Forever and a Lifetime by Jennifer Horseman. I just read these fat historicals. There was nary a queer character. And I stopped reading romance, in my teens because I was serious and avant-garde, and so I put away those books. And then when I was in grad school and had gotten my mind open by various writers that had a much more eclectic, boundary blurring, egalitarian view on genre, I started to realize that my highbrow, quote unquote, avant-garde tastes were not incompatible with looking at popular forms, and I felt freed. And I went back to romance and found that it had changed, and that there were many more queer writers, right? I mean, there have always been, since the 70s, there were, queer, gay and lesbian presses and, queer romance that would get published, but I'm talking about the kind of mainstream space. And so now in the sort of mainstream romance space, I could find queer romance and romance by writers of color. And I was like, oh, this genre is so exciting. I want to come back here as a reader and a writer. But I also, as I was saying, was in grad school and wasn't sure if I was ever going to find a job as an academic. And I thought, oh, maybe I can sell romance novels and make money as a romance novelist. And so I was sort of writing with that in mind, maybe I can sell a book. And so I was I'm going to write something with straight people and dukes. And so, finding an angle in it that was interesting to me and still felt politically and socially rich, but I was this is what I'm going for because I'm trying to hit the market. And I didn't. I did not. And I sold, I think I may have sold, I don't know. I published with a couple of smaller digital first presses. And then I got an academic job, but I still had a manuscript. And that's when I found an agent. And that's when I got a Big Five book deal. And then suddenly it was wait, how am I'm a new faculty member, and now I have to write a book a year, and I'm so slow, and how am I going to do this? Anyway, so I wrote those romances, the first three on the contract, and the pairings, the main characters were straight, but there were friends that I knew would have queer love stories if they got their own books. And given that I had then had a little bit of traction with my editor and with having these Big Five romance novels, I thought, well, now is the moment. And I'm queer. I've dated a range of different people, different orientations and identities. But my partner is trans masc and is an academic of gender. Latin American history, gender studies, Jewish studies. He does a lot of different things. But I thought it would be so awesome if we could do something where we could be in deep collaborative conversation and bring a lot of his research into it. And so I talked to my agent about the idea of writing a short thing where Kit, a side character from the earlier books in that series, gets his own story. And I was really, I feel lucky that she was so excited about it, and that my editor was also excited about it, even though, we had conversations about the fact that, for better and worse, own voices as a hashtag, it existed, it was retired, but there's like a desire on the part of readers to know that writers share the identity of marginalized characters that they're writing about, and have the experience, sensitivity, do deep research. And so we had a conversation. I'm not super online, and so I've written, as you pointed out, like straight romance, and people don't know that I'm queer and in this kind of relationship. And so it was an interesting process. Like, nobody ever asked me to prove I was straight enough to write those other books, but but then they probably
Where's your gay
asked.
card, Joanna? Like, where's the rainbow card? Throw it down. Take it out of the deck.
I was like, I never had a rainbow by anything because I don't know about the internet, And so anyway, my partner and I were like, is this something that we want to do? Because he's not very online, and he's very out as a trans man. But when he first came, we live in North Carolina, and when he was first here, he wasn't out on campus, and there was the bathroom bill,
Right.
that was I don't know, now it almost seems quaint given the sort of large scale national attack on trans rights. But anyway, the point is, it was something that I really wanted to do, and it was really exciting to work on it together. And I did feel like I needed to establish myself a little bit more before I can have the conversation where the publisher was going to take a risk on a mainstream book with a transmasculine character in history, because there aren't that many historical romances with trans characters, though amazingly, and again, in mainstream publishing, though there are more now than there were before, which is great.
And I think also you have this very interesting transition of not just I started with straight romance because that was what I could get picked up by a big five publisher, and that was what my agent could sell, and that was what sells in the marketplace, and that's what's expected. And those earlier books also were dukes and duchesses, or they were people in the aristocracy. They were nobility. They're sort of like what you expect from a historical romance. It wasn't quite like, let's go on the marriage mart and let's dance around the ballroom. But there was that feeling and that vibe that people often expect from Regency and Victorian historical romance of, like, these are the people who matter the most. And now, over time, I'm not just seeing this shift in your work to queer. There were the queer side characters in those earlier books, but also to more middle class and career-driven people. They're botanists, they're doctors, they're artists, they're working. Not working class, they're working for their money. And that's such a huge difference from what we often see in the traditionally published mainstream, my job is to be the Duke. And there's 40,000 dukes somehow, because everyone wants to write a Duke. And you started by writing a Duke, and you sort of like moved away from the dukedoms.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, my agent, who's really great, she has said, you put Duke or Duchess in the title and it sells more. There is this craving for dukes, as you said. There's like 10,000 of them, and they're all 28 with six packs and
right. And I think if you actually go back and look at the time period of like Regency and Victorian, there were like 40 dukes in the whole country,
yeah.
And at any given time, maybe 2 of them were marriageable, and then they weren't sexy, They weren't sensible.
and not one of them ever married a milkmaid or a governess. Yeah, no, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, I guess I've just increasingly felt, freer to do things that are more interesting to me. Not that I wasn't interested in Anthony, my half-Greek anti-imperialist Duke. With all of his demons, and his love interest in The Duke Undone. This is the first book in the series. Is a sort of struggling lower middle class, aspiring artist. But then through the different characters in the series, I was able to increasingly, pick people that were now just like adjacent in bohemian circles with maybe, artists, and then Lucy married a Duke, so there's like a Duke in the mix. But like I kind of could increasingly move away from that, to characters that have and, all of the characters have some means, but yeah, they're not coming from the sort of historical romance stratum of like marriage balls and things like that. Like they're in
generational wealth, imperialism, all those lovely pieces.
Yeah.
And I think also one of the things I like about it is because you do have, Lucy becoming the Duchess and having this artistic background, these bohemian friends, this sort of approach to things. It's like we are able to see into spaces where queerness was accepted, which you don't often see in the more mainstream historicals. But it's historically accurate.
Yeah, I sometimes I think we imagine the the history is like this kind of like straight line. It's sort of like things were bad and then they just progressively got better and better or something like that. And it's always been variegated. And it's not that in the 19th century people always 100% responded to queerness with disgust and hostility. It's like there were various responses by people that weren't queer to queer people, and there were also spaces where queer people could do their thing. The Victorian era was very homosocial in that separate spheres for men and women, which is problematic in various ways, women tending to be in the domestic, men tending to be in the public sphere, but it also allowed for a lot of queer hijinks in these homosocial spaces. And one of the reasons why I thought it was fun to get to set a short thing in the 1880s is that I'm thinking about identity, sexuality as related to identity. That's something that sort of starts in the 1880s as sexologists begin to study sex, quote unquote, like scientifically, and start looking, they're medicalizing it. I mean, they have an interest in presenting homosexuality as deviant or a sick, like a sickness, as opposed to moral degeneracy. And there's a lot of issues with this kind of medicalization and like pathologizing of queer people. And a lot of the sexologists were themselves men who practiced manly love. But it was still a move away from this, this other way of thinking about people who commit the sin of sodomy or something along those lines. And so homosexuality gets invented as a category in that period. And then afterward, heterosexuality gets invented as a category in the period. So even though there were more repressive well, I was saying there were more repressive laws. I mean, give us another minute. Anyway, sodomy in England was, punishable by death. Even though there were repressive laws, I think there was a surprising amount of freedom and flexibility because a lot of these categories were not like stabilized by the discourse, and people were able to move around. Lesbianism was never criminalized. It wasn't spoken of. It wasn't necessarily known even to be a thing. And so I think women in their domestic spaces were having all kinds of fun.
That's what I was just thinking, is if they weren't out in public, if they were just in their houses, then no one needed to know. They didn't need to meet up in quite the same way. That was more acceptable to just go to a friend's house.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I gotta tell you though, like the homosocial as a term, that would just sounds like a really good club name that I would go to socialize in. But also, I think, Joanna, you've touched on something that I really enjoy just as a framework. And I've been reading queer romance pretty much exclusively for 20-something years, and to see the evolution of that's been really fascinating. But to take a genre like romance, and we've talked a lot about on the show about a reader's expectations of romance. It's not only the happy ending, or what is it, the emotionally satisfying, optimistic ending was when that was the official definition. But it's like, we know the beats of things, right? We know that there's going to be certain frameworks. We can talk about the third act conflict normally being a thing. We know the tropes, and we find great comfort in those frameworks. And then to go into that and say, I recognize the framework, I recognize the structure, I like it, but I'm also going to fuck with it a little bit by putting a queer character in here, by putting a non-binary character in here, even if the language for that didn't exist, which is something I love that you talk a little bit about in A Sure Thing, in kind of the appendix, the afterword, talking about how there wasn't a lot of terminology, that Kit wouldn't have called himself any of these things because it literally didn't exist yet. So getting to go into not only romance, but into historicals and being able to say, yeah, you know what? I do have to use a little bit of modern language here so that the readers kind of understand what I'm saying. And I get to kind of mess with history in a way that it kind of reminds me of what they've been doing with Bridgerton in terms of the TV adaptation. You have Black people in the aristocracy. That wasn't quite the way that it was, but you know what? It's a little bit of a speculative fiction. Why not? Because it's something like what I want to see. So when you look at real history in the biggest of scare quotes, and how do you take queer experiences or experiences just from different people, different classes, different socioeconomic levels, different access to things, and say, I want to balance what the genre will allow me to do and what was factually true, but not fully rely on that because that may not mesh well with romance in terms of like the happiness. So how do you kind of balance those two things together?
Yeah, Courtney Milan, who I imagine, right, you read, said something in an interview that I've always found really interesting. And her books like push against ideas of like who's an aristocrat and whose story is centered in history and in historical romance. And she said that she wants to do things that could write works that have a degree of accuracy, but not ordinariness. Like she wants her books to be historically extraordinary. And that's something that I'm really interested in, sort of being at that line where maybe this didn't happen, but it could have happened. And in a slightly idealized world of romance, I think we look for those extraordinary situations where this is possible, and this potential kind of gives us hope and drives toward this sort of optimistic ending that is about what might have happened in the past, but also resonates in a present where I think we are looking for hope and models for how people lived loving lives, struggling against their circumstances back then, so we can bring that fuel for the fight to the present. In A Rare Find, the romance novel that I published last summer, it stands alone from the others. It's not part of the Victorian artist's world. It's a Regency, and there's a non-binary main character and Georgie, and they use they them pronouns when they think about themselves and with their friends. And that's not something that we have any record of anybody in the Regency doing. But English doesn't have a specific a third person singular pronoun for when gender isn't disclosed. Like the student dropped blank keys. We don't have like a different word for that. And so throughout history, there have been heated political debates about what do you do? Do you say the student dropped their keys? The student dropped its keys? The student dropped his keys? And that for a period of time, that universal he was what was defaulted to. But people invented other pronouns also in the 19th century to use for that, that missing word in English. So that was already in the ether. And sometimes people did use they. And so Georgie could have hit upon that with their friends. We don't know that anyone did, but people have always been creative and coming up with ways of, imagining beyond what's readily available or commonly done. And so that to me is an example of I wanted to have, because there were people who we would think of probably using the word non-binary today living in the past. And because there's such polarizing political debates around using they, them, and other pronouns today, it felt like, oh, it would be so nice to get to have this character just use they, them pronouns back in the day. And I tried to write a historically plausible conversation about pronoun use in that book. Because I think it's really important that we respect people's pronouns now. And I think this could have been a really, for me, like awesome way for a friend group to deal with it then. And so, yeah, I just find that sense of the extraordinary. Like it probably didn't happen, but it could have happened. And I'm a writer. I want to imagine something.
Let me think of things.
Imagine into that space of possibility.
Well, that's why I love, you've hit on something that I love as a theme, and I know this is a favorite theme of Meg's, which is the idea of found family, especially in queer stories. And I think when we're talking about this type of scenario, when you're like, yeah, maybe, we know people existed because they've existed forever, maybe there wasn't the language, but when you can not only show the interiority of a character kind of thinking about themselves and their own presentation and how do they want to show up maybe with their family. I'm a woman who wears pants, or outside, I'm a man and this is what I'm interested in. But when you can start bringing in their friends, when you can start bringing in people around them to add to that context, to me, it just really helps with the plausibility of that scenario. I'm thinking in A Sure Thing, when Lucy and Kit like reunite and reignite their friendship, and all of the other artists from the sisterhood are there and are like, okay, we're going to come up with a different word for it. Is it siblings? I don't really like siblings. Can I be a cousin? Well, I don't know. How are we going to see if you're a cousin? And having them have that conversation with and around the characters, to me, also helps build out that feeling, not only to better understand the character like Kit, but to really set it and give it a sense of location in addition to just a sense of description. And that just like, ooh, that feels nice when that happens. Because you're like, I do believe it, because I know people now have really good friends that'll have these types of conversations. And now I get to see these folks having these conversations. Yes, please, thank you. I'm all in now. Let her cook.
That's what I love that too about, I love that about romance novels so something that I don't love about one version of romance, right, is the idea that it's a trajectory that shows like a couple dyad coming into formation, and they're insular and they found true love with each other and no one else understands, and then you have this perfect pair bond. And the romances that I love are like, yes, there's this romantic pairing, or there could be throuple, could be more than a pair, but there's like these characters that are coming into like romantic partnership, but the love that they find together opens them up to all the other kinds of love around them, like love for their community, love for their friends, love for their political and artistic projects, like that kind of like the world is bigger, not smaller. We haven't retreated into this like couplehood. And so for me, it's really important to like show those friend groups. I love because my friends are so important to me and how I make sense of the world, and it really matters. And also I think it pushes against that like the like one, like the lone queer, the one black friend, the like, no, people have like robust lives where they're in conversation and community with people with whom they share affinity. And also with like writing Kit as a trans masculine character in mainstream historical romance, where there aren't that many trans masculine main characters in historical romance, I think a way to push against somebody ascribing too much to like, well, this is how a trans masculine person would have moved through the world back then. Like I think to kind of push against that sort of like there's this is when there aren't that many representations, it's too easy for somebody to think, oh, that's what that's like, when really there's no like one way to be anything. There's definitely no one way to be trans masculine in 1888, it's like showing Kit with a range of queer friends and having a range of people with different types of masculinity and femininity, and getting to see the diversity within the book is a way for me to also push against trying to people potentially thinking like, oh, this is what it means to be trans, because no one can tell you what it means to be trans. Mm-hmm. You get to decide that for yourself. It doesn't look like any one thing.
And I think that's so important too, to say like, just because one character is trans doesn't mean that they are the outlier. but that there is this choice to bring in other characters that have similar lived experience, because we do tend to attract people who have similar lived experience to us, at least in our friendship groups. And you at the very beginning, you said, I used to read historical romance and it was all just straight white couples and that's it, because that was the only format that could be functionally written, because publishers have rules around these things. And, the doors have now been opened and we can see the reality of some characters are straight. And that's fine to have a hetero couple.
Straight people can come too. It's fine.
I guess so. They can come to the party too. But also, they can have siblings who are queer. And those siblings can have queer friends. And you can just have queer friends without needing to also be queer yourself. And that's the reality of it. And I think that sometimes, honestly, hot take over here, the pendulum has swung too far in the opposite direction, where I read these 10 book series where every single person in the book is queer, and I'm like, do you guys have any friends who aren't, or do you have any siblings? Do you have anyone in your life who isn't queer? Because you're hockey players, and do you just not talk to any other teammates who aren't queer? How? Yes, okay, I won't go down on that.
Meg has feelings about series. No, but Meg, I think you've hit on something.
But I think there is, found family is important, and I think found family is especially important in communities where you are marginalized, to have people who have similar experiences to you that you can have those relationships and lived experiences with. But that's not the only thing that's happening in that universe either, and neglecting the fact that there's a larger world feels a little bit too universalized.
Yeah, and Meg, I think what this is hitting on for me, and Joanna, I'm very curious about this for you, is by setting these stories in a period where gender affirming care didn't really exist in the same way, right? You didn't have access to hormones. You didn't really have access to what we would call gender affirming care, gender affirming surgeries. So I think what really came up for me with that is, okay, cool. Because I think a lot of times in current discourse, when we talk about trans folks, we minimize them, or we reduce them down to hormones and surgeries, like physical appearances and what are they doing in that way. And that's all the conversation is. Whereas by setting these stories in a historical context where those types of things aren't available to them, we get to really talk about the social aspect of just people. How do they make friendships? How do they show up for their work? How do they engage with people in different spaces? And I think that's something I really appreciated about your work, Joanna, is because that's kind of off the table for the time period. You do get to talk about all of the other aspects that make up gender, that make up identity, that make up presentation, that make up how a character can move through the world, which allows the dialogue to expand just as much as a person's friend group or situation can expand. So it becomes much bigger. It has bigness to the conversation now, rather than feeling very reductive, which is I loved very, very much.
I think something I like about historical romance, and also fantasy or speculative fiction, is I think whenever you move away from the present, we're still always cognitively relating what we're reading to what's going on around us in our world. Even if it's this is on terraformed Mars, or this is in the 19th century, everything that's getting written is right now is written by writers who live now, and it's going to have a dialogue with things that people are experiencing today. But when it gets defamiliarized just enough, I think we can have different kinds of conversations. People who might feel like they're in the culture wars around girls in sports or something like that, in ways that I'm I would like to talk to you about trans girls in sports, and I have a lot of thoughts about why trans girls absolutely should be playing sports. But maybe a reader is already kind of prepared with a response to an issue, but then if they're reading about someone who's transmasculine in a bicycle race in the 19th century, it's you can't maybe immediately go to the same shallow talking points and canards. It's the conversation is different, the terrain is different, and so that's something that I like, that I think you get as an affordance of work that isn't set in the contemporary, that's speculative or historical or something like that. It's not just the public debates around hormone access or gender affirming care. It's now we're moving into a sort of different version of this. And so maybe you have to shed some of your preconceptions and just go into it differently. And people have been modifying their bodies to reflect their gender expressions. People of all genders for, millennia, from, makeup to, Kit does some binding, people do all kinds of different things, whether or not they're considered trans or queer.
I do want to talk a little bit about your process, especially as you start looking towards your future work and where do you want to kind of play in the various spaces that you've established yourself in. I love that you mentioned your partner and the research that he gets to do and how you collaborate on that. So when you start thinking forward to what is going to come next for you in terms of this romantic creative writing, what does that look like? Do you have in mind where you want to play next? Do you still see a collaboration with your partner in using their academic background? I'm sure you love to just sit on the couch at night and go, what about this? What about this generally? But as like a structured collaboration looking forward, what is that looking like for you at this point?
My partner Mir likes to say that that he contributes to my writing process because he's willing to get into strange poses. When I'm like, so if somebody is like a standing here and then wraps an arm around, because sometimes you're trying to describe.
I get it. I have aphantasia.
interaction.
I can't see shit in my brain, so I rely sometimes on Post-it notes or people to I literally have to draw out. I'm sorry, whose leg is where now? So I appreciate this. Thank you for your sacrifice, Mirror. Thank you for this.
I think Katie Roberts has done pictures of Barbie dolls in the positions to be like, look, it's possible.
Yeah, he lets me manipulate him like this very large doll, and I'm like, okay, so if an arm is here, but yeah, now thanks to our more in-depth collaboration around research, and also I would write a chapter for a short thing. He would read it. We would talk. We would think about we had a lot of conversation about choices around representation. And now he's forced to be my reader for everything. I'm like, you're a good reader, except that he's not complimentary enough. So then we fight, and I'm like, you have to. Now I'm like, I'm a writer. I have this fragile ego. You need to stop scowling at me and saying, yeah, it's fine, it's good. I'm like, no, you can't. I'm dying
Babe,
now.
No,
so I'm like,
no.
the rejection sensitivity dysphoria is real.
It's bad. It's really bad. And I teach creative writing. I teach in the arts, and so I lead with strengths, and he's he's a historian. He doesn't do that. So anyway, so I'm like, leave the room, text me emojis that are sparkly and saying I'm wonderful, and then we can talk about the real stuff. So I just feel really lucky to have him and also be in an English department with literary scholars who study literature of different time periods. It's enormously helpful. This could be a whole other podcast, and people talk about it a lot, but mainstream publishers are not really buying historical romance anymore. And so my next historical romance is going to be a novella that some writers are putting out as a anthology where we all write around a trope that is the same trope. It'll be my first independently released novella, and so it's been fun to work on that. It's also queer, trying out again different time period than late Victorian, so talking with him about that has been fun, and I'm interested in maybe trying historical mystery or historical thriller. It's that sort of balance of what do I find compelling as a writer and a thinker in collaboration with my agent and markets, and because I do want to write for an audience, and I enjoy this commercial space, but I also I don't want to compromise to the point where I'm just not behind what I'm writing. And so I think the mid-list not going away, or publishers not really supporting mid-list writers, that's been a conversation for a long time. It feels truer than it ever has. And so that's something that I'm just having to think about in terms of, I don't have a book contract right now. So it's in terms of getting another book contract, or I write experimental novels and stories and different kinds of things under my own name. And I am the chair of an experimental fiction press. I love many kinds of genres. So it's sort of a question of, what's next? in collaboration with like the people around me that I like to have as readers and like to share work with, and also what do I think can sell, and or do I move back into more exclusively into small press publishing. So it's a time for creative reflection, but also again in relationship to these like other market forces.
Joanna, when you think about the work that you've done to date, the work you're going to do now, you've mentioned in previous interviews that you think historical needs a little bit of a rebrand. So if I may, I'd love to play a little fill in the blank prompt with you. And here's my question. The historical romance rebrand needs to start with blank. You're in the power seat. Where are we starting?
More queer characters and characters of color on the streets and in the sheets.
Boom, I'm done. I have no further questions. Thank you so much. Everybody go home. That's a sticker, and I'm a fan of it. All right. Before we get into the question of what we are shipping this week, if you want to support us in the streets and in the sheets, I guess, we have lives. Head on over to your podcast provider of choice. Give us a rate, review, and subscribe. It makes us feel good in all of the aforementioned places, and we'd greatly appreciate it. Now, for the fun question of the week, Meg, what are you shipping?
So I shared a couple weeks ago that back in March, my family went to the Spy Museum down in DC, and I was like, I want more Cold War historicals. I want more World War II historical romance, and make it queer if we can. And I only found one of those that was queer and in that time period, and obviously there's not demand for it because I had to dig really far to get to it. But I found one that is not queer. It's straight. It is, I don't even want to say closed door because it is just like no sex at all. So that was a departure for me entirely. It was like they didn't even kiss until their wedding day, and the wedding was just like a marriage of convenience and like immigration reasons situation. But I did love this book. So caveats aside, this week I'm shipping When Twilight Breaks by Sarah Sundin. It is about a decade old because nobody's writing World War II or pre-World War II Germany, Nazi Germany. Turns out not really that popular. But it is the story of an American journalist working for the American News Service who's stationed in Munich in 1939. And so she's doing all this reporting on what is happening during Kristallnacht and during these, the Polish invasion and the Czechoslovakia invasion. And she's trying to do this work, but she's getting censored in a lot of ways. She goes on a date with a professor who is an American who is studying the German language. And he sort of starts to realize from his relationship with her that, things aren't actually as good as it seems in fascism, turns out. And then, crisis occurs. It sort of has a bit of a romantic suspense vibe to it. They end up needing to flee the country on Kristallnacht because, her passport got exchanged for a Jewish passport, even though she's an American citizen. And, the whole thing just blows up in their faces, and I, could not put down this book. So, highly recommend When Twilight Breaks by Sarah Sundin. Nikki, what are you shipping this week, this day?
I need to tell you about this book duet that broke my brain in the best way. Lark Taylor released the Shadow Duet. Book 1 is out at the time of this recording. Book 1 is called Shadows Never Lie. It is a brother's best friend romance. And
you had me at brother's best friend.
You're welcome. You have this character who has a twin brother, and they do not get along. They're very different. They have a very hard childhood. But his brother's best friend, Dominic, is kind of like, that dangerous kind of cool guy. And the series opens in the present but flashes back to their childhood. And we kind of follow them through a couple of years as Dominic and the main character, whose name is escaping me right now, have this kind of clandestine relationship behind the twins' back, and they're kind of keeping it secret from everyone. And then things come to a head, and it is a horrible ending for the two of them. And then we go back to where the book opened, where it's the main character's wedding, rehearsal dinner, and in walks his twin, and in walks Dominic, and he hasn't seen them in, I think, 5 or 6 years. It's a duet. So at the time of this recording, only book 1 is out, and I read it and I went, holy shit, I love this so much. I'm so stressed, but I love it. That I paid $50 to join Lark's Patreon so I could get the art copy for book 2. Book 2 was releasing a week later. It's probably out today, actually. But I was so obsessed with this book. It was 1:00 in the morning when I finished book 1 that I was like, I bet book 2 is already on her Patreon because it comes out next week. I couldn't wait 7 days to read book 2 that I paid $50 to join her Patreon at the level where I could get the art copy. Immediately read book 2, was like, holy shit, this is one of the best books I've read all year. And then I read it 3 more times and I went to bed at 6:00 in the morning. So emotionally wrung out, brother's best friend, slightly dark, hard one, happy ever after. Holy shit. Go read The Shadow Duet by Lark Taylor. Book 1 is Shadows Never Lie. Motherfucker, Lark Taylor. I tagged her on Threads and I was like, this is your fault. And she's like, sorry. Refuse. And that is my ship. Joanna, what are you shipping this week?
Wow. Well, obviously I'm shipping that now. Wow.
I know, right? Don't you just, like, I'm going to go read it, and hopefully it's out now, and I don't have to pay $50 extra, but it sounds like I would probably do it anyway.
Book 2 is out Friday. I just checked at the time of this recording.
Well, I don't read, like,
it,
a
though.
page a
Worth
second
it.
like you do, so it might take me until Friday to get to it. Gosh. Okay, listeners, by the time this goes out, you will be able to download both.
Okay, so one thing that I am shipping, I broke my right elbow, in March, which has been a nightmare. I can now touch my own face. It's amazing. It took a long time. And a friend of mine got me a left-hand keyboard that is like, you can, Matthias is the company that made it, but you hit the space bar and then the keys you type with your right hand it switches. And it's actually, and I'm dyslexic, and I was like, I am never going to be able to do this. But your mind does a mirroring thing that you're not aware of, and it works. And it has blown my mind. And now I can type again, and I'm like, I don't need this left-handed keyboard. But the fact that it exists is just something that makes me extremely excited. Like, I bring it out and show people, and I'm like, look at this. Watch me type my name.
What an amazing accessibility functionality. Like, how amazing is that?
Yeah, it's incredible. So that is something that I've been thinking about every day and being like, wow, good work, Matthias. Or
somebody who's broken my right arm 3 times. I'm like, I would probably just have that on standby.
Yeah, the half keyboard with the overlay of the keys. It's so amazing. And I just obsessively watch Invidiosa, this Argentinian TV show about a very pathologically envious 40-something woman navigating social relationships, written by Carolina Aguirre. It's so good, and the new season just came out, so that is my... It's incredibly funny. It's quite great. And then my friend Radhika Singh, I was just at her book launch, and she had her first book come out called The Earthly Playing Field from Common Notions, and it is set in a science fictional present, and it's about resistance to the crumbling empire and the birth of a multipolar world, but through the lens of a Sufi love story.
Okay, my TBR just got bigger.
Yeah, just added that right on. God.
Yeah.
Okay, well, we'll put all of these in the show notes because I'm going to need the links too.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's revolutionary and just saturated with longing, so...
I love it. I'm the longing, yearning of the two of us. I'm like, slow burn, all of it. Meg's like, no, thank you. I'm like, yes, please.
Bang in chapter 1, yes, please.
Joanna, where can people find out more about you? How can people support you?
I'm, again, very bad at the internet, but I do have a website. It's Joanna Lowell Author. And I think you can email me through that. I am on Instagram, though, again, I forget about it. But if somebody messaged me, I would see it at some point. And those are ways. And you could check out the books if you like queer historical romance, which how could you not? So
honestly, I love it. I highly recommend A Short Thing, and I've already got the other ones download it on from Amazon. I'm ready to read the rest of them. Fantastic. Joanna, thank you so much for joining us today. This was such a delightful conversation. And for you soulmates listening in, if you'd like to support the show, a few ways you can do that absolutely for free for no monies. Number 1, rate, review, and subscribe on your podcast provider of choice. 2, follow us on our social media profiles. We are at First Dates and Soulmates pretty much everywhere. And then you can check out our website. Meg has a really fun free quiz for you, firstdatesandsoulmates.com. And it will give you some most excellent recommendations of podcast episodes and some books and things that you should check out. And if you do have a little bit of money to send our way, you can check out our podcast sponsorships now available on the aforementioned website. We've got a merch store on TeePublic, and you can subscribe to the show on Substack. Do it for 1 month. Do it for many months. We're just so pleased as punch that you are here. And don't worry, soulmates, the queer talk continues because we are kicking off a full month of Pride episodes. Lots coming up for you then, so stay tuned, and we will see you then. Bye!